And of course, it leads to a lot of blended media experiences. No longer is it necessarily the case that people are only concentrating on one platform at a time. They are multitasking. Some Nielsen data suggests that 60% of people who are watching TV now are also frequently on the internet as they are doing it, in part because they like the social experience of that, or they just like to be checking out other things while the TV is on. So the implication of this for brands is that it's changing two spaces that really matter to you. It's changing attention zones on the one hand and media zones on the other hand. And I would argue that there are at least 3 attention zones that you would be wise to worry about. The first is the space of continuous partial attention. One of the things that happens when people carry around their media in their pocket is that they are sort of always on the grid and can always be interrupted and always have maybe the capacity to get new inputs that will change the thing that they most care about at the moment, or the way that they're acting on principles. The woman who coined this phrase, Linda Stone, who's a really smart technology analyst out in California, worries that this adds stress to people's lives. If they're sort of always on, always interruptible, it just can't be doing good things to them. But there are other people, and I love the idea of fluid intelligence that Kathleen brought up this morning, because it's, in a sense, this is what is the sort of raw material for fluid intelligence. You're always sort of available for new inputs and new ideas, and some people find that that's an important part of life and a useful part of life. But the second part of the change in people's attention comes from their deep dives into the information that really matters to them. In our research, this most dramatically shows up in their health searches, where somebody might not have known about a medical condition or a disease on one day, got a diagnosis the next day, or a loved one got a diagnosis the next day. The day after that, they have gone from 0 to 1,000,000 miles an hour trying to find out everything that they could about that condition. And they can access the most sophisticated stuff that is available to the most sophisticated specialists in the field. They can get access to clinical trials, they can get access to medical information, they can access patient support groups that can give them advice about how to cope with this illness, what problems of daily living might occur in this, and so they are instant experts. I have a friend named Andrew Fisher, who's at the Berkman Center at Harvard, who calls this the golden age of amateur experts. And pick a subject, it doesn't have to be healthcare, and any subject that really, really matters to somebody, they can study it to the depth that even experts a generation ago couldn't have hoped to study it. And so there's a place in people's lives where if they really care about something, they are deep down inside it in a way that is sort of brand new, and it's a different kind of media and attention experience for them. And the final thing, of course, is one that maybe is tied to continuous partial attention, but it's info snacking. It's essentially when you're carrying around your access to information in your pocket when you're waiting for something, or when you've just got a little bit of boredom to kill or a little bit of time to kill, you can get a quick hit of something. Oftentimes, there was a wonderful story in the front page of the New York Times on Sunday about Rivio, the company that's doing those Angry Bird, that Angry Bird game. It was specifically designed for filling in gaps in people's attention. You can launch some Angry Birds at those pigs at any moment and do it over a couple of seconds, but then go back to the bigger, more important part of your life when that little moment of micro boredom passes you. So those are attention zones, and they sometimes map with the new media zones that we see in our data. One of the new media zones, of course, is the social zone. When people are in social spaces, they are in a particular frame of mind about getting inputs, about access to their friends, about access to brands that matter to them, about the media encounters that they want to have. They are sort of open, and their frame of mind is what's new. Tell me what's going on, what did you read, what did you see, where have you been, and things like that. So it's a very sort of open-minded zone for maybe interventions by you guys. Then there are immersive zones where people don't necessarily want to be interrupted that much. They are into the thing that they are into, the gaming experience, the new 3D experiences that they might be getting on their television sets after the holiday season and things like that. There are places where people are sort of lost in the media moment and are not necessarily in an open frame of mind. They're interacting with other people, but it's in pursuit of a very particular kind of activity that's tied to that immersive space. Then there's streaming space. There are ways in which people use these new environments, essentially knowing that flows of information are going past them every day, and they check it out every once in a while. They're trying to figure out what the newest headlines are. They're trying to figure out what maybe new information might have been coming through the stream on something that they cared about in their hobby or their personal life or even their business life. But their frame of mind there is, let me check out what is in the flow and what I might have missed and what I need to catch up with. Then there's a creative participatory zone. This is a space where people are very interested in encountering other media, other inputs, other kinds of information from advertisers and others, but it's in pursuit of something where they want to be the media maker. They are happy to exploit what you give them and take some tools that you give them, information you give them. They might remix your stuff or things like that. But when they are in creative space, they are wanting to kind of exploit the things that are around them, not necessarily act in a transactional way about the things around them. Then, of course, there's study workspace, which is a little bit more dedicated, a little more bounded. People are highly purposeful and instrumental as they're dealing with media in these spaces. They'll take other inputs. They might be creators in that same space. But again, they're sort of more single-minded or certainly less distractible when they are in these spaces. Okay, that's the impact of mobile connectivity. Now we're going to talk about social networking, and I take Chris's point from the breakout session. Social networking is probably an insufficient word for what happens there, but there are particular ways to talk about this from our data, and he talked about social activity, by the way, which is I like as a word, and it's much smarter and much better. But for our purposes, it was interesting to track the rise of technological social networkers. This is not a new activity. People have had social networks for forever. And the prominence and importance of social networks in people's lives was growing even before the internet and other technologies came into their lives, because of political trends and social trends and economic trends. We're much more being thrown back onto our own resources. We don't have social safety nets of tight ties like we used to. We're now networkers. And so we have to be a little bit more fluid in the way that we engage the world. And what social networking technological spaces have added to this is they have made these spaces much more vivid, much more capturable, much more understandable. And so we've seen just in the past half-decade the number of technological social networks workers go from essentially zero in 2001, 2002 to now 48% of the entire adult population. So half the adults in this country participate in social networking spaces. And that has done a whole bunch of things to the kind of information and the kind of environment we're talking about. As this has become a mainstream, much more diverse, sort of much more democratic population, this has essentially gone from being the province of young people to the province of lots more people who are older and more diverse economically and racially and ethnically, is that the population itself has changed. And so the character of the content in the space has changed too. It's not just sort of what people did in that very early days of the Harvard Facebook, by just sharing updates about what's going on and maybe gossip about professors and stuff like that. It's the whole panoply of social experiences that people are sharing. It's updates and posts about things that matter and experiences that they've had buying and shopping, and it's the sort of array of content has broadened essentially to be everything that people talk about. And that is a much more sort of diverse content character than what was talked about in the early days of social networking. It's changed the rhythms of engagement. As more people have come into the social networking space, it's not just things that happen between classes in colleges. It's things that happen on the rhythms of work life and family life, and it's again sort of a changing character of a space that you guys are trying to understand. And most importantly, from a social researcher's perspective, it's changed the composition and use of people's social networks. In the era of technological social networks, people's networks have gotten bigger, they've gotten more diverse, they've gotten more segmented, and they've gotten more layered. Now, that makes a lot of sense because networks are serving more purposes for people nowadays. One of the things that people do when they're under stress is to find new filters or new ways to organize the things that are giving them stress. So one of the great values that social networks have now to people is that they are serving the functions that media gatekeepers and other gatekeepers used to perform in the era of industrial media. There are three ways that this sort of dramatically plays out in people's lives, particularly when you're thinking about where they spend their time and how they spend their time. At the first level, people rely on their social networks as essentially sentries for the things that matter to them. They open their Facebook page or they turn on Twitter in the morning to find out what people in their networks are telling them about what happened overnight. What stories matter, what encounters matter, what things that happened to them overnight mattered. It's essentially an early warning system in the way that that morning newspaper or that morning broadcast or that morning TV show used to be. And part of the reason that this is so valuable to people is that the people in their social networks, either they've signed up to be followers or friends of people because they know that what they look at and what they do is interesting to them. But it's a way for them to be understood. My friends send me references to material that they know that I will appreciate. So social networking now is a way of filtering information and telling you sort of what's happened that's important over time. Word of mouth matters in a new way. Social networks also now matter in new ways as evaluators and assessors of information. One of the things that people do when they encounter a news story, a piece of media, a factoid, or whatever that confuses them, or it doesn't fit into the map of the world that they've got in their head, their standard response now is to ping their network, or at least ping the smarter people in their network to sort of say, how do I process this? What weight do I assign this new information? How do I fit this into my worldview? And they're depending on, again, smarter people in their network, or at least the crowd in their network, to help them make meaning out of it, to help them give it the right weight and importance in their lives. And so social networks now are evaluators, assessors, credibility, engagement mechanisms for people. And finally, social networks are forms for action for people. One of the ways that social networks have changed in this era is that there are new layers on them. And one of the most important layers in a social network is the audience layer. All of us who have Facebook pages or Twitter accounts have people who are following us or trying to friend us that we don't know. And really, they don't know us other than by reputation or the brand affiliation or because we know a friend of a friend or something like that. But this audience layer can be really helpful at specific times in their lives. If they've got a specific query about a subject and they know that somebody's an expert on something like that, even if they don't personally know that person, if they are connected to a brand or they're connected to a friend of a friend or somehow have sort of crossed the bar of trust that it matters in people's lives, they will pump out information or receive information as a member of an audience that really matters. And so this is another way that social networks have expanded, social engagement has expanded, and has meaning and influence in people's lives.